All right, well, my editing skills are crap, but can the same thing be said about Jumanji? Welcome to the jungle. Stick around and find out. Welcome to the jungle! We got fun and games! We got some styles! I don't know the words of any popular song, so sorry, that's all you get. I'm Peter Franson from christiangeekcentral.com and Spirit Blade Productions. This is my uncut review of Jumanji! Welcome to the jungle! The synopsis, provided by Sony, says, a brand new Jumanji adventure. 4 high school kids discover an old video game console and are drawn into the game's jungle setting, literally becoming the adult avatars they chose. What they discover is that you don't just play Jumanji, you must survive it. To beat the game and return to the real world, they'll have to go on the most dangerous adventure of their lives, discover what Alan Parrish left 20 years ago, and they won't have to do that. They do that, I guess, but they don't have to do that. That's a weird thing for Sony to put in their synopsis here. So they'll have to go on the most dangerous adventure of their lives. I guess they'll have to discover what Alan Parrish left 20 years ago. It's nothing that's relevant to the plot, really. And change the way they think about themselves. Or they'll be stuck in the game forever to be played by others without break. That's a weird final sentence. Anyway, I never saw the original Jumanji. It was a kids movie came out when I was kind of not in the kid zone anymore. I'm still not interested in seeing that movie. I saw this one purely for the premise of teenagers being pulled into a video game and then playing their selected avatars, kind of taking on those bodies. And I wondered if this was going to shake its kid movie roots enough to appeal to me, and it did. It totally did. I'm trying to remember the last movie I reviewed that I enjoyed as much as this one. This was a bit of a surprise to me. It uses modern video game tropes for a number of jokes, which as a video game geek myself, I really appreciated, although the references aren't quite as modern as they could be. Now, it's a Sony picture, and so when you see the first kid playing video games in his room, it's legit. They've got like a poster for Uncharted 4 and some other Sony property or something, So, he's playing like modern games on a modern console, and yet the script itself feels just a tiny bit dated, just a tiny bit out of touch. I'm not completely. In fact, I wouldn't even say largely it feels out of touch, but I'm guessing maybe they were trying to, use modern game tropes, but then also incorporate some classic game tropes that maybe these teenage characters really honestly wouldn't be that familiar with, but that maybe some people in the audience that are a little bit older would be familiar with, and so that they could connect with this, the video game aspect of this story too. Anyway, they appear to be in the equivalent of an open world game in this movie. That's how I would describe the type of game they're in, and yet their adventure is described in terms of a sequence of levels that they have to get through. But if you're playing an open world, Ubisoft game, you don't really think about the different places you have to go and the things you have to accomplish as levels. If anything, levels in video gaming today describe your character. What level is your character, And then in this movie, they also use the classic 3 lives and then game over trope, which most games don't use anymore. You just have infinite lives, you just respawn or reload at a checkpoint or something like that. But they do have respawning in this game, And there's also like RPG-like stat bonuses or perks that are common to many modern games, even those that aren't RPGs. And then there's also, a reference to female objectification in costume design, which is very common in video games. And so those things are referenced that are, more on the modern side. Regarding the latter, unfortunately, even though they were kind of like referencing the fact that, hey, why this character gets into her avatar and she's like, why am I just wearing this halter top? I'm in the middle of the jungle. This doesn't make any sense to have my midriff exposed like this, And despite kind of like jabbing at that tendency in video game costume designing, it didn't really drive production choices, which would have been nice. It would have been nice. I mean, after that character remarks on their sexually objectifying clothes, she only superficially makes an effort to kind of cover herself more, kind of progressively. First, just barely at all. I'm just like, really? That's your attempt at like covering yourself? And then they go further a little bit later, which makes more sense. But it's very brief. Then she, ends up taking those kind of coverings off because she needs to sexually objectify herself in order to help the team get through a situation. So, it's a little bit inconsistent in its messaging there. The script and characters, though, had me laughing more often than any movie I've seen in a long time, and that shouldn't be an indication to you of whether or not you'll laugh, because I feel like I don't laugh at most movies that other people find funny, but I do tend to laugh at movies that, as a starting point at least, are self-deprecating. It's characters that are inept or insecure, or they're fish out of water characters, and that's totally what I would use, the words I would use, the phrases I would use to describe what this movie is, the type of humor it is. And on top of that, for whatever mysterious X factor reason that may or may not work for you, I just found these actors and their performance in that type of humor to be really funny. The opening scenes of the movie introduced the teens, who were more interesting than I thought they might be. Then those personalities are transplanted onto more familiar movie stars who play the avatar versions of them for the most of the movie. It's definitely a comedy through and through, but it's an adventure comedy. It's got lots of action and excitement, quote unquote, which for me, a movie that has lots of excitement intended may not be exciting for me. Usually it depends on whether or not I care about the characters. Do I think that they are really exerting themselves, really in trouble? Do I have reason to care that they succeed in their goals and stuff like that? And I found that each character in this movie felt developed enough and relatable enough to me that I actually did care about them a number of times, both during some of the suspenseful moments of action and also some of the quieter character-driven moments, which are few and far between. Well, I don't want to say far between. They're brief and kind of peppered throughout, but, appreciated. As far as the cast goes, I really enjoyed this cast. The teenage actors, especially Alex Wolff, who plays the nerd Spencer, who's kind of, I would say, the central character, he felt, real, or at least interesting and quirky to me, and I thought the other teenage actors did a pretty good job as well. And the main cast of adult actors, featuring Dwayne The Rock Johnson, Jack Black, Kevin Hart, and Karen Gillan, which I'm not really familiar with. Anyway, they really had me laughing and rooting for them as they their characters stumbled through the story, trying to play it cool or just completely losing it or being totally insecure. It was just fun to see them as actors playing against their type, visually, what you would typically see The Rock do, even though The Rock has done some, off-type roles where he's playing someone that's, more gentle, surprisingly gentle, or whatever. He's playing this very insecure, kind of like nervous nerd, in his big bulky body. And so that, of course, leads to some funny moments. Jack Black is playing this like really self-absorbed teenage, kind of attractive high school girl who wound up selecting him unknowingly as her body in the game. So there's some great moments for me that came out of that. Kevin Hart felt the least like a transplant of the parallel teenage actor's performance, but only in ways that made him, I thought, more funny and more endearing to me. So I was like, okay, it doesn't feel quite as consistent in the same way that the others do with the teenage actor and what they were doing in his scenes, but that's fine. It's funny. It's resulting in funny moments, so I'll take it. There's lots of, as far as stunts and visuals go, lots of CG in this movie, but none of it bothered me, as it might in other situations. They're in a video game after all, and the nature of the story is not to be grounded. They're not in a real-world, quote-unquote, setting. They are in a fantasy environment, and it's a comedy largely. It's not asking me to really buy into the danger in the same way that another movie might ask me to. And so for those reasons, the CG, it doesn't bother me as much. It doesn't affect, I should say, say my enjoyment of the movie. The fight choreography was fun in some cases, but I think could have been used more effectively to represent one of the character's dance fighting skills. They kind of make a thing out of this character, have dance. One of her skills is, or strength is dance fighting. And the way they kind of interpreted and put that on display was, I don't know, she more or less just danced normally with music playing and distracted some guys momentarily, and then broke into mostly regular looking combat while music was playing in the background. So I would have enjoyed, I think, a different realization of the concept of dance fighting in this movie, but that's a minor nitpick. The world was very satisfying to look at. As someone who has recently come to enjoy the Far Cry series of video games, this world kind of scratched that visual itch. I kind of thought of a number of things in this game as kind of like being in the Far Cry type of experience, even including like, well, this wouldn't be Far Cry so much as maybe like Ghost Recon Wildlands, but motorcycles that they really are really good at climbing and going pretty much anywhere they want. There's a scene in this movie where a motorcycle is just like, okay, yeah, that's a video game motorcycle right there. All right, so is there anything in this movie that I think might stimulate worthwhile thought or conversation regarding like moral or spiritual or philosophical topics? Maybe, in a comedy like this, I'm not confident that the themes will kind of stick the landing, as it were, in our hearts. But there are some good themes here, if we take a moment to think about them. Each of the heroes, in some way, these teenagers, who are then represented by these adult characters, or actors, they're all caught up in their own perspectives, and they fail to see other people or themselves with clarity that does justice to each of our own complexities as people, instead of just being kind of like labels or overly simplified evaluations of each other. We are just a lot more complex, and, certainly other people are more complex than how we kind of label them or describe them or think of them in our minds. Some characters in this story feel victimized, unaware at the same time of how their own insecurities and prejudgment of others, their own defensiveness, contributes to the way that they are actually mistreated. Some characters are abrasive because of internal pain or insecurity, but they're not thought of. They're just kind of thought of by others as just kind of being jerks or whatever. But actually, there's like some wounds and some hurt and some insecurity going on there that's motivating that. The chief moral, I think, taught by the story is to look outside of our own limited perspective and consider how others feel and think. I think this is so key for us as geeks. We often live in a very personal, just kind of internal world of the mind, where we're just kind of alone with our own thoughts and our own perspective a lot. We're not really engaging or seeking out the views and the perspectives of others. We're just kind of staying very internal a lot of the time. Now, we may not cause our victimization. I don't want to suggest that, but we can sure contribute to it. We can sure make it worse than it needs to be, or we assume maybe that we have people figured out and then sabotage our relationships because of those assumptions about other people. We can give weight to the hurtful words of others, not realizing that those words should not be given any weight, because they're often generated by another person's own hurts or insecurities rather than a reliable perspective that we should give weight to. There's an enormous amount of pain we can avoid, compassion we can genuinely feel, and relationships that we can enjoy if we are humble enough to consider that our perspective on ourselves and on those around us may need to be more considerate and informed. All right, well, I have no idea what your taste in movies are, but if I were a time traveler, I would go back in time and say, Peter, wait, and actually just buy this one. Just buy it. You're going to laugh a lot, and you're going to want this one in your collection. Your boys are probably just old enough for the male genital and subtle sexual humor in a few spots, but be prepared for some Q&A there. There's probably going to be some questions or comments or whatever, and maybe it'll be a springboard for discussions of appropriateness or, any kind of questions they might have that might come out of that. But be prepared for some Q&A. Aside from that, this will probably be be one of those rare movies that both you and your boys will actually equally love watching. It's rated PG-13 for adventure action, suggestive content, and some language. All right, those are my thoughts. I'd love to get yours in the comments below. Please consider supporting this channel by becoming a Spirit Blade Insider, which grants you exclusive monthly behind-the-scenes content. For more info, you can visit our About page over at spiritblade.com, spiritblade.com, where you're also going to find our audio dramas and our weekly podcast. And if you want to like, share, and subscribe here, that would help as well. Finally, there's a ton more content and community over at christiangeekcentral.com, so I hope you'll join us there soon as we continue to geek out and seek the truth.